Okay, we're going to be studying this morning in 1 Samuel chapter 3. Glad to have you folks that are with us, you ladies that are here, and also those that are watching online. Trust that we'll get some understanding of this chapter that the Lord would have us to. It's a short chapter and not as many verses as we have in the others, but there's some really good thoughts in this chapter. So, reading from verse 1 of chapter 3 of 1 Samuel. And the child Samuel ministered unto the Lord before Eli. And the word of the Lord was precious in those days. There was no open vision. So the child Samuel, we know that he has been now here in this place where Eli was in ministering in the temple of the Lord, which was the tabernacle. You're studying about the tabernacle on Tuesday nights, and this is where Eli was the high priest at this time here. And so Samuel, of course, was the answer to Hannah's prayer. And why was it that she was praying for a child, for a son so badly? So much.
She couldn't have one.
She couldn't have a child. She was barren. But there's another reason why she was really praying for one.
She realized the state of the nation, that they did not have godly leaders, that God needed to raise up somebody.
That's right.
To speak for him.
The high priest at that time wasn't a very spiritual man. And it says here, the Lord was precious in those days. This word precious has a meaning of being rare. In other words, now they had about 13 judges as their leaders. This was after Joshua died. Moses was their leader, and then when he died, and then Aaron was the high priest, but when Moses died, Joshua became their leader. And he was their leader, but then after Joshua died, they didn't have anyone that was a definite leader, and so God gave them judges, had judges come on the scene to help lead them, but they weren't really paying attention to the judges. The people weren't. They weren't doing just what they should have been doing and following God. And so it says the word was rare, was precious in those days, and that has the meaning here of being rare. Actually, the meaning of precious here is heavy in price. It's talking about something that was, the same word is used in Psalms where it says, precious in the sight of the Lord is the dead of his saints. And so that it does have that meaning of being precious, but it also has the meaning of, because it's so high in price, it's rare. And that's what you get the meaning here of being rare. And it was rare because the people were not following the Lord as they should have. Most of their judges were not following the Lord and leading the people in the way they should have. And so, and the fact that it was rare is because there was the prophets. God would send a prophet to give what he wanted the people to understand. He would give the word to the prophet, and the prophet would tell the people. But there weren't very many prophets. Evidently, there weren't very many people that were following the Lord in these days. But there were two prophets that we read about up until this time. And the first one was a lady, a prophetess, she was called. What was her name? Remember? Deborah, that's right. Deborah was a prophetess. And then, remember, God told her that the Midianites were going, I think it was the Midianites at that time. Anyway, some nation was going to come and fight against them. And so Deborah asked, I should have looked all of this up before trying to talk about it, but anyway, Deborah asked this man to help her, Barak, I think, and they were going to go and fight these people. Well, Barak said, I won't go unless you go with me. So she said, okay, I'll go with you, but then it will be known that you won't get the credit, but the woman will get the credit for it.
And she wasn't talking about herself. That's what, it sounds like, I'll get the credit, but you won't, but it's not even Deborah.
So who got the credit?
The lady that killed Sisera?
Gail? Not Gail. What was her? Jael or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, she's the one that gave the real victory. But there just wasn't very much of the word that was going forth in those days. Then God began raising up prophets. There was another prophet that we read about up until this time, and he's the one that did prophesy concerning the Midianites, that they weren't going to, that God would help them fight that battle. But the child ministered unto the Lord. And I thought about that. At this point in time, I imagine Samuel was approximately 12 years old. And you know, how old was Jesus when he went and was talking to the ones there when he was just a child? He was 12 years old, and they were amazed at how he knew so much. But anyway, I think that Samuel was about that age when it says he ministered unto the Lord. Do you think children can minister to the Lord?
Yes.
They certainly can. And things that they do that we might not think of as being ministering to the Lord, actually the Lord is taking it as such. If he knows their hearts, he knows their desires and what they're wanting. If they're wanting to please the Lord, well, they are pleasing the Lord. They're ministering. And it's just, we shouldn't count children off as not being very important. They are very important to the Lord. So he ministered to the Lord before Eli. And we studied last week that Eli wasn't a very spiritual man. He was a high priest, but he wasn't a very spiritual man. That's why Hannah was wanting to have a son so that she could raise him up to love the Lord. And she did, although she only had him in her home for the first few years until he was weaned. But I'm sure she was telling him about the Lord all during that time. And then she would make a little coat, it's called, but it just to cause his clothes that he was wearing to grow with him as he would grow. And I'm sure that she would come once a year to the tabernacle, and they would offer their offerings and all. And she visited with him during that time. So they would stay there usually a few days and offer their offerings and have they would offer peace offerings. And when they would offer a peace offering, they would get part of the meat from the offering, and they would all eat it together and have fellowship. And so during that time, I'm sure she was teaching Samuel. And so they were ministering before the Lord, and she was teaching him. But the word of the Lord was precious, or it was rare in those days, because there just weren't, the prophets weren't there, and God wasn't sending them very often. But that's the period of time where it said, we read in Judges that every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Kind of reminds me of today, how it is in our country now. Every man doing what's right in their own eyes, and it's not a good situation. So we're praying for the Lord to come in and for Jesus to come and bring this solution. But anyway, there it says there was no open vision. That word open means to break out or to disperse. And so there was that no open vision. The vision of the Lord and the vision of God and what he wanted was not there, was open. It wasn't publicly recognized from the prophets what God was wanting and how God was wanting them to do. So then in verse 2, and it came to pass at that time when Eli was laid down in his place, and his eyes began to wax dim, that he could not see. And ere or before the lamp of God went out in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and Samuel was laid down to sleep, that the Lord called Samuel, and he answered, Here am I. So at this time, at this point of time, Samuel is there with Eli. He is helping Eli in many different ways. And as Eli was going about his doing the work of the high priest in the tabernacle, and where they would sleep would be close to the. We have the tabernacle back up here, close to where the candlestick is and where the altar of incense. Well, they probably had little tents or a little room of some kind close to this tabernacle, close to that part of it. And that's where they would sleep. Now, the high priest, of course, was sleeping close to it, keeping watch over everything. But Samuel, they had a little place for him to sleep that was close to where Eli was, so he could help Eli in whatever he needed. Eli was an older man at this time, and it talks about how his eyes were dim. He couldn't see very well, so he would need, pardon me, he would need someone to, like Samuel, to run errands for him and do different things that he would need. And so Eli was laid down, and his eyes would wax dim. That just showed that he couldn't see very well at this point in time. I can understand that now. But anyway, and then, so verse 3, and ere the lamp of God went out in the temple of the Lord, Samuel was laid down to sleep. So they would have to trim the lamps, the wicks and all in the lamps, both morning and evening, because the lamp was to be burning continually. It wasn't to go out. The lamp, of course, every part of the tabernacle has to do with different parts of Jesus and his ministry, how he has been. And so the lamp is Jesus as the light of the world. And so that's why God wanted that lamp burning continually, because Jesus' life is continually the light of the world. And so the high priest probably would trim the lamp like that. And because Eli was older, I'm sure this was one of the jobs that he had left with Samuel to do, to trim those lamps, that lamp, so that they could always have light. And so it says before it went out. This just simply means before they went to trim it again. So they probably had trimmed it at night, gotten it burning through the night, but before it went out enough where they needed to trim it again the next morning is when this happens here. It says Samuel was laid down to sleep, and he would have gotten up then the next morning to trim the lamp, but said, the Lord called Samuel, and Samuel answered, Here am I. So Samuel thought it was Eli calling him, because Samuel hadn't known the Lord well enough at this time in his life to recognize his voice when he would call to him, and to know that was the Lord calling. He thought it was Eli calling. So he answered, Here am I. In verse 5, and he ran, this is Samuel, ran to Eli and said, Here am I, for thou callest me. And Eli said, I called not, lie down again. And he went and lay down. And then verse 6, the Lord called yet again, Samuel. And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, Here am I, for thou didst call me. And he answered, I called not, my son, lie down again. Eli didn't realize that Jesus, God, was the one that was calling him. But as he continued, then Eli began realizing. So verse 7, now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, neither was the word of the Lord yet revealed unto him. It just simply means he didn't understand. And the Lord called Samuel again the third time. Of course, the Lord knew him inside and out. He knows every one of us. He knows what we understand and what we don't understand. So the Lord called him again. And he arose and went to Eli again and said, here am I, for thou didst call me. And Eli perceived then that the Lord had called the child. So it took Eli a while to recognize it, but he finally did realize that it was the Lord. And so the reason that he didn't is because the Lord hadn't called Samuel like that before this. And when the Lord wanted to say something, Eli probably thought he would have talked to him about it. But he didn't. He called Samuel instead. What does this show you about the Lord's dealings?
That was what he's doing.
That he's not going to continue dealing with Eli, the high priest. He is going to use little Samuel now. And Samuel has gotten a little bit older, and so he's going to be able to use him to work and where he can become the high priest.
I wonder, another reason that Eli didn't get on this right away was what you read at the first, that the word of the Lord was rare
Yes.
in those days.
He hadn't talked to Eli probably in a long time.
Probably because he couldn't hear him.
Well, he wouldn't recognize his voice. See, he didn't at first, didn't recognize him. So, and that's the way it is. If the Lord is dealing with us and we're not paying any attention to him, we don't recognize when the Lord deals with us at times, like we should.
I mean, Eli probably couldn't hear him.
Physically couldn't spoke to his spirit.
Yeah.
So the Lord called Samuel again the third time, and he arose and went to Eli and said, here am I, for thou didst call me. And Eli perceived then that the Lord had called the child. So therefore Eli said unto Samuel, go, lie down, and it shall be, if he call thee, that thou shalt say, speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. So he is giving good advice to Samuel at this time. For thy servant heareth. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Can you imagine what he was thinking when he went and lay down there and was waiting? And is he going to call again? And is this really the Lord speaking to me? You can imagine some of his thinking. And then in verse 10, the Lord came and stood and called as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. When the Lord speaks twice, calls a name twice, there's always something important that follows. Preston talked about that several months or weeks ago. And when the Lord called Abraham, Abraham, and that's when he asked him to go and take his son and offer him as an offering. But he's going to say something very important to Samuel too. Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel answered, speak, for thy servant heareth. And the Lord said to Samuel, behold, I will do a thing in Israel in which both the ears of everyone that heareth shall tingle. This word tingle has the meaning of, well, I have it here somewhere.
Verses 11 through 14.
Yeah. To rattle together as reddening with shame. Now, I don't know how your ears would rattle together, but probably it just has the thought of not really wondering what's going on, and their ears would rattle. And it said reddening with shame also was a part of the meaning of it. But God had warned Eli through a prophet back in chapter 2. Let's turn back and read from verse 27 of 1 Samuel chapter 2. And there came a man of God unto Eli and said unto him, thus saith the Lord, Did I plainly appear unto the house of thy father when they were in Egypt in Pharaoh's house? And did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest? This is talking about Aaron, the high priest. To offer upon mine altar, to burn incense, to wear an ephod before me. And did I give unto the house of thy father all the offerings made by fire of the children of Israel? Wherefore kick ye at my sacrifice and at mine offering, which I have commanded in my habitation, talking about the tabernacle, to make yourselves fat with the chiefest of all the offerings of Israel thy people. Now, God had given permission for the priests to have part of the meat from the offerings that they would offer. Part of it was burned unto the God, and on some of the offerings, like the burnt offering, it was all burnt unto God. But in some of the offerings, the priests could eat part of this as their own food, because there wasn't only meat, but there was other offerings also that they would bring. And so the Lord is reminding him here, it says, reminding Eli. And that's where he said, you honor your sons above me to make yourselves fat with the chiefest of all the offerings of Israel, my people. Wherefore the Lord God of Israel saith, I said indeed that thy house and the house of thy father should walk before me forever. But now the Lord saith, be it far from me, for them that honor me I will honor, and them that despise me shall be lightly esteemed. Of course, that word despise has the meaning of to not think of importance of, not think it's very important. And that's what we do when we're not obeying the Lord. We just have the thought and giving it forth. What the Lord wants isn't that important.
Just blow it off.
Mm-hmm. And that's putting ourselves up above the Lord. How terrible when you think of it in that way, above the Lord. But this is how he was talking to Eli through this prophet, which was very unusual in those days. They didn't have words coming from prophets to tell them what the Lord wanted, but this time he did. But Eli didn't pay any attention of what he did. Verse 31, let's go ahead and read that. Behold, the days come that I will cut off thine arm and the arm of thy father's house. This arm, just talking about the strength of your family and your father's family. That there shall not be an old man in thine house. Now it was considered a very thing to be desired to live to an old age and to have older men in your family. That was supposed to be showing the Lord's blessing on your family. But he says in verse 32, and thou shalt see an enemy in my habitation and all the wealth which God shall give Israel, and there shall not be an old man in thine house forever. And the man of thine whom I shall not cut off from mine altar shall be to consume thine eyes and to grieve thine heart, and all the increase of thine house shall die in the flower of their age. He says, your ones in your family are going to die in a young age. And he says, this shall be a sign unto thee that shall come unto thy two sons, on Hophni and Phinehas, and one day they shall die, both of them. And then we'll see later on when that did come to pass, right soon after this.
Which they deserved, most definitely.
Definitely. Their lives were terrible.
Yes.
And Eli knew their lives were terrible. He knew they were sinning. And he said, after this prophet told him that God wasn't pleased with it and God was going to bring this judgment, then Eli went and talked to them, sons, you shouldn't be doing this. But he didn't stop them. He should have put them out of that office, not let them continue in any way.
That's a coffee.
Oh, okay. But he didn't. He didn't stop it. And so that was honoring his sons. It was giving them more honor than God, who had told him what to do. Yes, it was terrible, but he didn't do it. I think when God had sent this prophet to him, he was giving him an opportunity He should have done it without God bringing the prophet. He should have known how wrong it was.
Isn't that precious that that's how sweet the Lord is?
Yes.
I wouldn't have done that.
No, and you were talking a while ago about you wouldn't do this and that. Well, sometimes the Lord might want you to. But anyway, Eli didn't. And so this judgment was going to come. And that's why the Lord then brought this judgment we're talking about and reading about in chapter 3. So let's go back then to verse 11 of chapter 3. The Lord said to Samuel, Behold, I will do a thing in Israel at which both the ears of everyone that heareth it shall tingle. In that day I will perform against Eli all things which I have spoken concerning his house. When I begin, I will also make an end. So what God has said he would do will come to pass. When God says he's going to do something, he will do it. And he gave Eli opportunity to do something about this, and he didn't do anything about it. And so now it's too late. Now he is going to
Reap what he sown.
Yes, he's going to reap. He says in verse 12, In that day I will perform against Eli all things which I have spoken concerning his house. When I begin, I will also make an end. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile, and he restrained them not. And therefore I have sworn unto the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be purged with the sacrifice nor offering forever. Now notice that. Now, when people would sin in those days, they would bring a sacrifice, and the Lord would take that sacrifice, and as they're wanting to be forgiven, and he would forgive them. How could that sacrifice forgive them of their sins?
You got me. To me, it's a done deal.
Are you talking just about them, or just
I'm talking about any of them that would bring a sacrifice, would bring an animal to sacrifice or whatever they brought.
Well, I guess that's the way God made it. You bring an animal and they,
Why did he
Because
make
of
it
the
that
shedding
way?
of blood?
what?
Why did he make it that way? Why did God make it? No,
It was
you're
looking
just
towards
not
Jesus'
thinking.
Death on the cross.
That's it. Those sacrifices, blood had to be shed. So those sacrifices was looking forward to when Jesus would have his blood shed for the sin. If Jesus hadn't died on the cross, those animals dying wouldn't have meant a thing, wouldn't have done anything. It was looking forward to the cross.
But how many times did he let him do that?
Well,
Provide those sacrifices?
this is one time when he didn't.
Well, yeah.
Notice this, and that's what I was wanting to bring out. He let them do that many, many times, just like Jesus forgives us. We are forgiven because of his death on the cross, many times. But at this point now, in Eli's life, he says the sacrifice isn't going to take this judgment away. It had come to pass that Eli had done too much in not taking his sons out of that place and letting that sin go on. It was terrible, the sins they were doing. They were not only eating some of the food that they were not supposed to be eating and doing all kinds of things like that they weren't supposed to be doing, but they were also taking those women and laying with them when they shouldn't have. Their sin was terrible.
And you think too that, like you said, other people probably experience this, but this is dealing with the priesthood.
Yes.
That's right.
To make a point, why was this situation so pointed out?
Yeah.
Because it had to do with the priesthood.
Yes. But also then, this reminded me of when David spoke after David's sin. in Psalms 51, let's keep your place in Samuel, but turn to Psalms 51. I want to read there how, the Lord dealt with David about his sin with Bathsheba. And I want to read from Psalms 51, verse 16. David is repenting of what he did, but he said in verse 16, "For thou desirest not sacrifice, else would I give it. Thou delightest not in burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, thou wilt not despise." And so David realized that he had sinned and God wasn't going to be satisfied with him just bringing a sacrifice. God wanted a broken heart. He wanted a heart that was willing to receive God's instruction and do what God wanted. And that's the way it is with us. Turn now to Hebrews 10. I want to read because God is the same. He has never changed. And thank the Lord for Jesus giving himself for us. Otherwise, every one of us would have died. But in Hebrews chapter 10, in just a minute, I want to read chapter 10, verse, just a minute. Should have had this. Yeah. Verse 26. The writer here, I think it was Paul, but anyway, he says, "If we sin willfully, after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins, but a certain fearful looking for of judgment and fiery indignation which shall devour the adversaries." There comes a time when just saying, just saying, "Well, I'm sorry," and so on. And then if our heart isn't changed, that's not acceptable with the Lord. It says there comes a time, but a certain fearful looking for of judgment and fiery indignation which shall devour the adversaries. He that despised Moses' law, and then he takes us back to how it was in the Old Testament times. Despised, here's the meaning of not thinking it's important again. He that despised Moses' law in the Old Testament times died without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. And that's the way it was here with Eli's sons now, because they died without mercy. But he says in verse 29 here, "Of how much sorer punishment, suppose ye, shall he be thought worthy, who hath trodden under foot the Son of God, and hath counted the blood of the covenant wherewith he was sanctified an unholy thing, and hath done despite unto the Spirit of grace." Whenever we sin willfully and we continue in sin, we're doing despite unto the Spirit of grace. We're just saying it's not important. What Jesus' death on the cross is not important. And so their punishment will come. That doesn't mean that Jesus' sacrifice wasn't enough. His sacrifice, if it wasn't for his sacrifice, none of us, like I said, would live at all once we sin, and we have all sinned. But when Adam and Eve sinned, what did Jesus, when God came down, what did he do? What's the first thing he did when they sinned?
He killed the animals and made them.
He killed an animal.
Them
That's
with
right.
animal skin, and the blood was shed.
Yes, he shed the blood of an animal. That's looking forward to when Jesus would shed his blood. And that's why he didn't kill Adam and Eve. He had told them, if you sin, you will die. Well, they did die spiritually, but they would have died physically if he hadn't killed that animal. And so God is looking at our heart. And that's what he's wanting, a changed heart. When there's sin, for us to continue in fellowship with God, there needs to be a changed heart. But aren't you thankful that he does? When he sees thankful that he sees our heart, and when he sees our heart that he accepts us. The salvation through the plan of Jesus, the plan of God, is so wonderful, more than we can ever realize and ever think. But it's notice verse 31, he says, "It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God." He wants us to realize the importance of not just thinking that what God wants us to do is not important. It is important, and if we are not obeying God as much as we can and know how, then we can expect problems from that God will allow to come. We'll go back to Samuel, but keep your place in Hebrews. Probably told you too late.
No, I got it.
In Samuel verse 15.
1 Samuel 15?
Yes, chapter 3, verse 15.
Oh, 3.
He says, verse 14 says, "Therefore I have sworn into the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be purged with sacrifice nor offering forever." And that's why I read this in Hebrews, because we can't just expect the Lord to, when we continue sinning and don't pay any attention to what God is wanting, that we can't expect just for things to go on as they have in the past. But let's read from verse 15 then in 1 Samuel 3. "And Samuel lay until the morning." God had told him what he was going to do to Eli. "So Samuel lay until the morning and opened the doors of the house of the Lord." See, that was some of the things he was supposed to be doing. "And Samuel feared to show Eli the vision." You can imagine. This was a terrible thing that God had said he was going to do to Eli's household. And so Samuel didn't want to tell Eli. "Then Eli called Samuel and said, 'Samuel, my son?' And he answered, 'Here am I.' He was obedient. And I'm sure that he knew that he was going to have to tell him. But he said, 'Here am I.' Verse 17, "And he said, 'What is the thing that the Lord hath said unto thee? I pray thee, hide it not from me. God do so to thee, and there more also, if thou hide anything from all the things that he has said unto thee.'" So he's making it pretty sure to Samuel that he better tell him everything. I'm sure Eli had a pretty good idea of what it was going to involve, because God didn't tell him again. He had warned him with the prophet. Now he didn't tell Eli again. He went through Samuel. And Eli realized, I'm sure, even though Samuel was just a boy here, that he was the one God was going to use, because he was a very obedient child. He's one that Eli had learned to love. You can tell from the way he talks here and so on. And he was the son to Eli that Eli's natural sons should have been. So he said, you need to tell me. And verse 18, "Samuel told him then every whit, everything, and hid nothing from him. And he said," then this is Eli said, "It is the Lord, let him do what seemeth him good." He knew it was the Lord, and he knew that he might as well accept it. So let him do what seems good to him. And verse 19, "And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and did let none of his words fall to the ground." So Samuel, quite a bit of time is in this one verse here. Samuel grew, He grew probably from about 12 years old up to probably about 20. That's when he would be able to work as a high priest. And so everything that he had said came to pass. And verse 20, and all Israel from Dan even to Beersheba knew that Samuel was established to be a prophet of the Lord. So here they hadn't had prophets, but now they all knew, everyone realized Samuel was a prophet of the Lord.
Well, was Samuel a prophet and the high priest?
I believe he was. He was a prophet and the high priest. But his main office was a prophet.
Okay.
Yeah. So they had other priests that would be doing all of that work. In verse 21,
Yeah.
and the Lord appeared again to Shiloh, in Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord. And so we have a lot of time in these last two verses, but that the Lord has revealed himself to Samuel. The Lord started dealing with Samuel and teaching him, and Samuel then started teaching the people what the Lord wanted. But in Hebrews 12, I want us to turn back to Hebrews
Are we
12.
gonna come back to Samuel?
I don't know, we might.
Okay, Hebrews 12.
Yes. We were in Hebrews 10, so now we're going to Hebrews 12. I'm going to read from verse 5. And ye have forgotten the exhortation which speaketh unto you as unto children. My son, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord, nor faint when thou art rebuked of him. For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every one whom he receiveth. Whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth. If you haven't been chastened of the Lord yet in your life, you will be. I imagine every one of us here have been chastened of the Lord. But you may need to remind yourselves, he chastens whom he loves. He loves us. And so he won't let us go like Eli let his sons go without being chastened. He loves us, and so he chastens. And you know, that word scourgeth, you know what that means? To bring the blood.
To bring the blood?
Mm-hmm.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I have it here somewhere.
Bring the blood.
It's talking about bringing the blood.
Is that the same, is that the same word in a sense as scourge? When they says that
Scourge
Jesus?
was scourged.
Yeah.
Yes, uh-huh.
And so is that the same?
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I didn't look at it up this time, but I'm sure it is. Because that's whereas he chastens us, but then when he scourgeth us, that's when it means it's a harder chastening to bring the blood. And
This says just every son.
every son,
He scourges every son.
yeah, but whom he loveth,
He is considered a son in this sense, perhaps. Not getting out of it.
The verse 7 says here in Hebrews, if ye endure chastening, God dealeth with you as with sons. For what son is he whom his father chasteneth not? Well, Eli's sons didn't get chastened like they should have been, but then they did. They were killed afterwards. But he says, but if ye be without chastisement, whereof all are partakers, then are ye bastards and not sons, not really sons of God. Furthermore, we've had fathers of our flesh which corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Shall we not much rather be in subjection unto the Father of spirits and live? For they verily for a few days chastened us after their own pleasure, but he for our profit, that we might be partakers of his holiness. I think we all need to read this portion of Hebrews often, because we are all going to be chastened of God, and we need to realize it's because He loves us, and He wants to train us, teach us. But in verse 11, now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Yes, it is grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. Wherefore, lift up the hands that hang down, and the feeble knees. And this is talking about our hands and our feeble knees. Don't just go around thinking, oh, it's such a terrible life. Lift up your hands in praise to the Lord for what He's doing. And your feeble knees, you're having a hard time walking for the Lord. No, know that the Lord is in control, and accept what He brings to us. And in Proverbs 3, we won't turn, but in Proverbs 3, verses 11 to 12, we read, my son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, for whom the Lord loveth, He correcteth, even as a father the son in whom He delighteth. So the Lord was with him, was with Samuel here, teaching him and guiding him daily, causing all that he spoke of to be that which was ordered of the Lord. He continued in humble obedience to the Lord who sustained him. So the Lord did take Samuel, make him a prophet, make him give the office of the priest, and used him mightily until he went on till Samuel died. But God is no respecter of persons. In Acts 10:34, we read that. He's no respecter of persons. He loves one and corrects one just as He does others. He will bless and guide everyone who will give Him honor and obedience. Samuel had obeyed Him from a child, and God was able to use him in whatever way he was needed. So God will never leave Himself without a witness. And I think that's been true all through the years. God has had someone to be a witness for Him. At one time there it was Deborah, who was a prophetess. He used her. And I think today, whenever He uses, He doesn't have a man to do what He needs done. If there's a woman, He'll use a woman for what He needs to have done. But when He has to use a woman, I think it's a sign of not very good on the men. The men should take the place of leadership. But at times, a woman will have a place of that. But Samuel had obeyed him from a child, and so he was a good witness for the Lord. The word Shiloh, that's where the tabernacle was at this time. That means peace or abundance. So the tabernacle is a beautiful picture of Jesus, and Jesus is full of peace and abundance. Any thoughts?
And I think, I may be mistaken, but I think that in Samuel's years that he was the prophet, it says he traveled here and he did these kind of things. But I think he always ended up at Shiloh.
Oh,
I think that's
yes.
where his home was.
I think that you're right there. Because that's where the Ark of God was, who's spoken of being the presence of God. So,
I think that was good.
I'm not sure how to turn this off.
Oh, I'm Derek, I'll text him and he'll come.
Okay. But next week, the Lord willing, we'll go into the next chapter, which is a longer chapter. But I hope you're enjoying this study of 1 Samuel.